The moment Leah told me she'd never loved me, it was like the ground beneath me vanished. Everything I believed in shattered in an instant. Welcome to today's story. But before we dive in, I'd really appreciate it if you could help me reach 1,000 subscribers so I can continue bringing you more amazing stories. Your support means the world to me. Thank you so much. Now, let's jump into today's story. The main character finds themselves in a situation where they must face a painful truth. Have you ever gone through something similar, or can you relate to this situation? Stay with us until the end to find out how the character overcomes this challenge. Let's begin. My name is Ethan Carter, and for the longest time, I thought I had everything figured out. I had a stable job, a beautiful home, and a wife, Leah, whom I truly believed was my soulmate. We'd been together for over 4 years, and married for 2, and life felt good. Not perfect, but good. And that was enough, right? I worked my butt off every single day as a project manager at a construction firm, always making sure we had everything we needed. A nice house, dinners out, little thoughtful gifts. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think I was doing a good job as a husband. I loved her. I woke up every morning grateful that she was the first person I saw. There was something about Leah's smile that made my day. But looking back, I realize now how much of it was just me trying to convince myself. Leah, she always seemed like she cared. She'd send me sweet texts while I was at work, plan small surprises, and even stayed home to take care of me when I was sick with the flu one time. All of these little things gave me the impression that we were good, maybe even close to perfect. Then, out of nowhere, things began to change. It wasn't a dramatic shift at first, nothing that would make you question everything. But small, subtle signs began to appear. Leah started coming home late, her energy seemed drained. But it wasn't from work stress like she claimed. It felt more like something inside of her was just gone. At first, I tried to push it off. People get tired, right? Work gets stressful. Maybe we were just going through a phase. I mean, no marriage is perfect, right? I've always believed that relationships go through ups and downs, and maybe this was just one of those rough patches. Maybe it wasn't even anything to be concerned about. I told myself that it was normal, that we were just a little out of sync. Like a tune that was just a bit off but would eventually fall back into place. But it wasn't just about being tired anymore. It was deeper. Something had shifted. But I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The signs were subtle at first, like tiny cracks in a foundation that, on the surface, seemed solid. I started noticing these small changes in Leah, tiny but unmistakable shifts in how she interacted with me, how she carried herself, and even in the way she looked at me. Take our dinners together. For instance, we used to have this little ritual. After a long day, we'd sit down and talk over dinner. We'd catch up, laugh about random stuff, share stories from our day. But recently, that dynamic had changed. More often than not, she'd sit across from me, barely touching her food. At first, I thought maybe she wasn't hungry, or perhaps she was just tired from work. But it happened too often. I'd ask her if something was wrong, if she wasn't feeling well, and she'd brush it off with a quick, "I'm just tired." Or, "It's nothing, just work stuff." But I knew it was more than that. It felt like her mind was a million miles away, like she wasn't really there with me. There were these moments when I'd catch her zoning out, lost in thought. And it hit me how distant she'd become. It wasn't just a lack of engagement, it was as if she wasn't even present in the room with me. We'd be sitting on the couch watching TV. And instead of the usual banter between us, she'd just stare blankly at the screen. Her eyes would be distant, empty, like she wasn't even seeing what was in front of her. Sometimes, she'd nod as if she heard me, but the lack of real connection made my chest tighten. I'd ask her, "Babe, is everything okay? You've seemed a little off lately." She'd always respond with the same rehearsed line, "Everything's fine. Just work stuff, you know?" She'd force a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and I'd see the same tired look in them every time. It was like she was giving me a performance I didn't need, but she was still giving it to me nonetheless. And I began to wonder, where did the woman I married go? The one who would laugh at the silliest things, who would talk about her day and share her dreams with me late at night. It felt like I was sitting next to a stranger. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the shift happened, but it became so obvious that it hurt. There were nights when we'd sit there, side by side, in complete silence. It was uncomfortable. I'd catch her staring out the window, lost in her own world. I'd catch myself glancing at her, trying to find the Leah I knew. But she wasn't there. Not fully. So I started paying more attention. I wanted to fix it. I didn't want to believe that we were on the verge of something falling apart. I didn't want to believe that all the time and love we'd invested in each other was just slipping through the cracks. I didn't know how to fix it, but I couldn't just sit there and watch it get worse. So I tried everything I could think of. I'd surprise her with little gifts, things I knew she'd like. Flowers, her favorite chocolate, a new book I thought she'd love. I planned spontaneous date nights, thinking that maybe we just lost that spark. I tried to do everything I thought would bring us back to where we were before, when everything felt right between us. But nothing worked. Every time I made an effort, Leah would smile and thank me. She would say all the right things, make the right gestures, but it felt hollow. It was like she was just humoring me, doing what she thought she needed to do to keep things from falling apart even further. I started to wonder if I was just chasing after something that was already gone. I kept telling myself that she'd appreciate it, that it would make a difference. But it never did. I would catch her looking at her phone, checking her messages, or zoning out at the dinner table. And it hit me like a punch to the gut. I was doing all these things for her, trying so hard to reconnect, but all I was really doing was keeping up the illusion of a relationship. The truth was, we weren't really connecting anymore. She wasn't coming back to me. She was slipping further away, and I couldn't stop it. And yet I kept trying. I couldn't bring myself to give up. I wanted to fix us. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I had built my life with, could be so far removed from me. I couldn't fathom that this was the new reality. Maybe it was just a rough patch, I told myself. Maybe if I just kept doing my part, everything would go back to normal. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about work stress or being tired. It was something more, something that I wasn't ready to face. The hardest part was that Leah didn't seem to care. At least, not in the way I wanted her to. She'd go through the motions, smile at the right moments, say the right things, but I could feel her drifting away. The space between us was growing wider, and I was losing grip on her. I couldn't reach her anymore. The harder I tried, the more I felt like I was chasing someone who was already gone. But I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. Then came the day that changed everything. It was an ordinary afternoon when I came home early from work. I had wrapped up a project ahead of schedule, so I thought I'd surprise Leah. The sun was still high in the sky, and the air outside had that late spring warmth to it. Everything seemed calm, normal. I opened the front door quietly, hoping to sneak in and catch her off guard. I wanted to make her feel special, even if just for a moment. But the moment I stepped inside, I heard her voice. It wasn't unusual for Leah to be on the phone. She'd often call her sister, Kate, during the day. But this time, something felt off. The way she was talking, it wasn't the lighthearted, upbeat Leah I knew. The tone was different, serious, almost tense. And then I heard it. She was talking about divorce. Divorce. My stomach dropped. It was as if the floor beneath me had opened up, and I was falling into an abyss. My heart began to race, and for a moment, I was frozen in place. I didn't know what to do. Should I walk in and confront her? Should I just stand there and listen to understand what was really happening? The seconds stretched into what felt like hours as I stood there, paralyzed by shock. Couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only hear Leah's voice, trembling slightly, as she spoke to Kate. I don't know how to tell him. Leah's voice cracked, and I could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air. He's a good guy, he really is. But I can't keep pretending. I didn't know what to feel or even how to react. My chest tightened, and I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat, thumping so loudly that it drowned out the rest of Leah's words. Divorce? After everything? What had happened to us? Was this a joke? I thought I knew everything about our relationship, everything about her. Was I really that blind? Was this something she'd been hiding from me all along? It felt like everything I had built, our life, our marriage, was falling apart in front of me, and I wasn't even in the room for it. My mind raced with a million thoughts, all of them jumbled and incoherent. I stood there, just outside the living room, unable to bring myself to walk in. I wanted to confront her, to demand answers, but I was frozen in place. Was this about me? Was this something I had done? Or was it about something else? Someone else? I heard Kate's voice through the walls, but I couldn't focus on the words. She was saying something, trying to comfort Leah, telling her to take her time. That it was okay to feel conflicted, that making a decision about divorce was never easy. But none of it mattered. I couldn't focus on anything other than the fact that Leah, the woman I loved, was talking about ending everything we had. Divorce was never a word that had been part of our vocabulary. Not once in the 4 years we had been together. And yet, now it was the only thing I could hear. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. Every bit of the reality I had carefully built was disintegrating. The images of our wedding day, our vacations, the quiet mornings over coffee, it all felt so distant now. Were all those moments just a facade? Was I just the person she had settled for? The person she had to pretend to love because it was the right thing to do, the practical thing to do? I could feel the anger rising, but at the same time, there was this overwhelming sadness that drowned out everything else. I didn't know how to process this. I didn't know how to make sense of it. How could Leah do this to me? How could she just, after everything we had been through, turn around and say she couldn't keep pretending? It didn't feel real. It felt like some cruel twist of fate that I couldn't wake up from. I couldn't stay in that moment, not anymore. I couldn't stay there and listen to her talk about ending everything. So I backed away from the door, my hands shaking as I reached for my keys. I wasn't ready to face her yet. I needed time to think, to process what I had just heard. I didn't even know what to say. There were too many emotions swirling in my chest: anger, confusion, hurt. I just needed to get away. I needed space. I walked out of the house, my footsteps heavy, like I was walking in a fog. Everything around me felt unreal, distorted. I could feel my pulse quickening, my head spinning. I stumbled to my truck, got in, and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life, but I barely noticed. I didn't even know where I was going or why. I just had to drive, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell was going on. I didn't have a destination. I didn't want to go home, and I didn't want to go anywhere familiar. I just needed to be somewhere else, anywhere else. The miles passed by, but I wasn't really paying attention to the road. My mind kept circling back to Leah's words. Divorce. I kept hearing it over and over in my head like a broken record. And every time I thought I understood it, the meaning of it shifted, warped into something I couldn't comprehend. The drive felt endless. I kept going, not knowing where I was headed, but needing to keep moving. Each minute stretched out into an eternity. I didn't even realize how much time had passed until I looked at the clock on the dashboard. An hour had gone by, but I didn't feel any clearer. I still couldn't make sense of what I had just heard. How could Leah, the woman I thought I knew, be so distant? So willing to throw away everything we had built? Was I really that blind? Or had she been hiding this from me all along? My grip on the steering wheel tightened and I thought about turning around. Going home. Confronting Leah. But I couldn't. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face her and hear more of what she had to say. Especially not after hearing that. I felt like everything was unraveling, and I was powerless to stop it. I drove for a while longer, still not sure what to do next. My mind was still spinning, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Whatever this was, whatever Leah was going through, it wasn't just about me. It was about something deeper, something I had missed, something that had been there all along, hidden beneath the surface. I didn't have the answers. I didn't even know where to start looking for them. But one thing was clear. Our marriage, the life we had shared, wasn't what I thought it was. And now, I had to figure out what that meant for the future. When I got home, I tried to act normal, even though nothing about the situation felt normal. Leah was sitting on the couch, absorbed in her phone. Her fingers moved rapidly across the screen, but she didn't seem engaged in anything. It was as if she was trying to distract herself from something, or maybe from me. I walked into the living room, and she looked up at me almost startled, as if she didn't expect me to come home early. Her surprise was the first clue I needed. Her demeanor shifted, and that subtle change didn't escape me. "Hey, you're home early," she said, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the slight quiver in her voice. She was trying too hard to cover up whatever she had just been talking about. Whatever conversation had just passed through that phone. Her attempt at normalcy was like a mask that couldn't quite hold its shape. I stood in the doorway, my heart racing. My chest felt tight. the questions pressing down on me. I couldn't take this distance anymore. Something was off. Something was wrong. My gut was telling me that she wasn't telling me the truth. "Everything okay with Kate?" I asked, trying to play it cool. I wanted to sound calm, relaxed, like I wasn't dying inside, like I didn't already know she was hiding something from me. I was trying to control my voice, trying to act like I hadn't heard a thing, but the doubt was suffocating me. She froze for a split second, and I saw it, the flicker of panic in her eyes before she quickly masked it with a strained smile. Her hand faltered slightly, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. "Kate? Oh, yeah. Just the usual stuff," she replied with a shrug, her eyes darting away from mine as she focused back on her phone. She was avoiding my gaze, and I knew it. She was lying. I didn't know how, but I knew it. Something had shifted in her, and it was so painfully obvious now. But my mind was spinning, the pieces not quite fitting together. I could feel it in my gut. This gut-wrenching suspicion that had been growing for days, for weeks. I wasn't just imagining this, right? I wasn't just overthinking. My heart pounded louder as I stood there, fighting the urge to demand the truth from her right then and there. I wanted to yell, to ask why she'd been coming home late, why everything between us felt different. But instead, I swallowed my anger. I didn't want to make things worse. I didn't want to accuse her before I had proof. So I let it go for the moment. I tried to act like everything was fine, like I was perfectly okay with the way things were. But inside, I was dying. My mind raced, my thoughts spiraled. What was going on with her? What was she hiding from me? A few days passed in this strange, unsettling silence. Leah was still the same, distant, cold, almost like a stranger. We barely spoke. She would come home late most nights, staying out later than usual, giving excuses that didn't sit right with me. Work was crazy, she'd say. Had to meet with some clients. Or sometimes, she'd just say nothing at all and slip quietly into the house, her eyes avoiding mine, her demeanor colder than I could ever recall. It wasn't until that night, when she came home late again, that everything hit me like a ton of bricks. It wasn't just the lateness though, it was the way she entered the house, so quietly, so deliberately, like she was trying to sneak past me. She didn't even greet me when she walked through the door. She just hung her coat on the rack, set her keys down, and immediately went into the bedroom, not bothering to say a word. I stood frozen for a moment. Every part of me wanted to follow her, to demand an explanation, to confront her about everything. But I didn't. I couldn't. I wasn't ready. I wasn't sure I could handle it. But the silence that followed her footsteps was deafening. It felt like the distance between us was stretching out wider with each passing second. I waited. The tension in the house was thick, suffocating. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout and demand answers right then and there. But instead, I just sat there in the living room, my mind racing. I replayed every moment, every conversation in my head, trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. Was it something I missed? Was it something I didn't want to see? How had we gotten here? Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my legs stiff, my heart pounding in my chest. I needed answers. I needed to know the truth. I walked into the bedroom, finding Leah sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me, staring at the floor. She didn't acknowledge me, didn't even flinch when I entered the room. I could see how exhausted she looked, the weight of everything weighing heavily on her shoulders. "Leah," I said, my voice low but firm, trembling slightly with the anger I had been holding in for so long. "We need to talk." She didn't respond at first, but I could feel the tension in the air, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, she turned her head to look at me, her expression guarded, her eyes bloodshot like she hadn't been sleeping. She let out a deep sigh, as though she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. "What do you want to talk about, Ethan?" Her voice was cold, detached, like she was already emotionally checked out of this conversation. I took a step closer to her, not wanting to back down. "About everything. About what's been going on with you. About why you've been acting so distant. About why you've been coming home late every night." She looked down again, her hands clenched in her lap. "Ethan, please. Just drop it, okay? I'm just tired. That's all. Don't lie to me, Leah." I snapped, the frustration bubbling over. "I'm not stupid. I know something's going on. I know you've been hiding things from me. I heard you talking to Kate. You were talking about divorce. You were talking about ending everything. Why didn't you tell me? Leah, why have you been keeping this from me?" Her face went pale, and for a moment I thought she might break down. But instead, she stood up abruptly, her body stiff. "I didn't want to hurt you, okay? I didn't want to see the pain in your eyes. But this is happening whether we talk about it or not." I stepped back, my mind racing. "You're telling me that you've been planning this behind my back?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, filled with disbelief. "You've been thinking about leaving me and you never said anything?" Leah's shoulders slumped. Her voice cracked when she spoke again. "I never meant to hurt you, but I can't keep pretending, Ethan. This isn't working anymore." I stood there, motionless, feeling the weight of her words crash down on me. Every part of me wanted to scream, to beg her to take it back, but I knew deep down that it wasn't something she could just change. The truth was out now, raw and painful. There was no going back. "Is there someone else?" I asked quietly, the question hanging between us like a final verdict. She hesitated, then shook her head slowly. "No, there's no one else. It's not about anyone else. It's just, I'm not the person I was when we first met, and neither are you." I could feel the air in the room grow heavier, suffocating me. The walls seemed to close in. There was no more pretending, no more hope. The truth had finally come out, and everything we had built together was crumbling in front of me. Leah came home one night, tipsy, but not just tipsy. She was completely drunk. I could smell the alcohol the moment she opened the door. The stench hit me like a wall, and for a split second, I wondered if I should say something about it. If I should stop her from stumbling inside. But I couldn't. My chest was tight, and the words just wouldn't come out. She was already halfway through the door, already too far gone. Her makeup was smeared across her face. Her eyeliner smudged like it had been through a storm. She could barely walk straight, her balance off-kilter as she tripped over her own feet. The moment she entered, she dropped her purse on the floor with a thud like it didn't even matter. Her shoes followed suit, kicked off with a careless motion, landing haphazardly on the floor. She collapsed onto the couch next to me, her body falling in a heap, as though she was too tired to hold herself up anymore. The sight of her like this, vulnerable, unguarded, and so far from the woman I thought I knew, shook me to my core. It was hard to reconcile this image with the woman I had fallen in love with. And I hated myself for feeling that way. I hated myself for being so distant from her, for the gap that had grown between us over the months. But in that moment, seeing her in this state, all I could feel was a cold wave of confusion. "Had fun tonight?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady even though everything inside me was on fire. The question felt meaningless, but it was all I could muster. I didn't know how to respond to her disheveled state, to the reality that was crashing down around me. I was trying to keep it light, trying to act as if this was just another night, but my heart was racing. "Yeah, tons of fun," she giggled, but the sound of it felt hollow, like it was being forced. She leaned her head on my shoulder, but it felt more like she was leaning on me out of habit than affection. Her body slumped against me, and I could feel the weight of her intoxication pressing into me. She smelled of perfume and liquor, an intoxicating mix of chemicals that only made my stomach churn. "You know what one of the girls asked me tonight?" she said, her voice suddenly turning serious. Her tone shifted, and I could hear the change immediately. It wasn't playful anymore. It wasn't even drunk talk. It was something deeper, something I hadn't expected. My mind immediately went on high alert, every part of me bracing for what might come next. I tried to play along, though my nerves were starting to kick in, the tension creeping up my spine like ice. I didn't know where this conversation was heading, but I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. "What's that?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite myself. She asked me if I was really happy with my life, and with you, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And just like that, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The question, so simple, yet so loaded, hung in the air between us. My heart skipped a beat, the question echoing in my mind, reverberating in every fiber of my being. Was Leah really happy? Was I really happy? I swallowed hard, but my throat felt tight, like I couldn't get air in fast enough. I wanted to ask her more, to demand she explain why she would even entertain a question like that. But my mind was spinning too fast, drowning in my own confusion. Suddenly, everything clicked. I wasn't ready for what happened next, but Leah's next words shattered whatever small sense of control I had left. "Am I happy with you? I don't even know anymore," she slurred, her words thick and disjointed, but there was no mistaking what she meant. It felt like she had just dropped a bomb on everything I thought I knew. My chest tightened so painfully that I thought I might suffocate. And then, she said it. The thing I had been avoiding, the thing I had hoped I was wrong about. I've never really been attracted to you. Not from the beginning. Felt like someone had punched me in the gut. My breath left me in a rush, and the world around me seemed to stop for a second. All the air in the room felt like it had been sucked out, leaving me in this vacuum of disbelief. The words hung in the air, each one more painful than the last. I could barely process what I was hearing. Leah, my wife, the woman I had loved for so long, had just admitted it. She had never really been attracted to me. All these years I had been living a lie, believing that everything was real. But it wasn't. It wasn't even close. Leah had married me not because she loved me, but because I was the safe choice, the good guy, the one her parents approved of. I wasn't the one she wanted. I was just the one who fit the mold. I was the man who checked the right boxes on the list. I was the stand-in for someone else. She had always been in love with someone else, someone who had come before me. Someone I could never compete with, no matter how hard I tried. And here I was, thinking that I was enough for her. That we had built something real together. But all along, I was just playing a part in her life. Just a convenient placeholder until something else came along. And the worst part? I had never seen it. Not until now. My chest tightened again, and I felt like I might suffocate. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake her, demand that she take it back, that she hadn't meant it, but I knew she had. I knew every word she said was the truth. I had been nothing but a stand-in, a substitute for the man she truly wanted. Her words hung in the air, her confession weighing heavy on me. I could hear her breathing next to me, unsteady. Like she was trying to steady herself but failing. She seemed so small in that moment, vulnerable and lost. But all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. How could I look at her the same way again after this? Leah didn't say anything else after that. She didn't try to explain, didn't try to take it back. Instead, she just sat there, her head still leaning on my shoulder, her body slumped against mine as though nothing had changed. But everything had changed, and I couldn't pretend it hadn't. I wanted to ask her why, but I didn't. I didn't want to hear the answer. I didn't want to hear about the love she never felt for me, the love she still had for someone else. I didn't want to hear how I had been a backup plan, a security blanket for her, someone to make things look good on the outside while she lived with a broken heart, always thinking of the one who got away. And in that moment, everything I thought I knew about us, about her, came crashing down. The woman I had built my life around was gone, and I was left sitting next to someone who was, in truth, a stranger. The next few days were a blur. Every moment felt suspended in time, like I was walking through a fog, struggling to make sense of everything. The weight of Leah's words kept replaying in my mind, louder and louder each time. I've never really been attracted to you. Not from the beginning. It felt like a constant hum in my ears, a sound that I couldn't escape, even in my sleep. All those moments we had shared, the laughs, the trips, the lazy mornings in bed, the promises of forever, every single one of them now seemed like a lie. I thought I had known her, thought I had known our relationship, but now it was clear I didn't know anything at all. I had been living in a dream, and the truth had just slapped me awake with brutal force. The memories I cherished, the ones I thought would last forever, started to feel distant, like they were happening to someone else. I began to question everything. Had I always known? Was I just too afraid to face the truth? How could I have been so blind? Or was I so desperate for things to be perfect that I ignored the signs? It was hard to believe that the life I had built with Leah had collapsed so quickly. One moment we were planning our future together, and the next, I was packing my bags, leaving our home, and walking away from the person I had once trusted completely. Felt surreal. Like I was living in a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. I stayed at a motel. It wasn't glamorous, but it was all I could afford at the time. The room was small, cramped, with peeling wallpaper and a dull, flickering light overhead. But in some strange way, it felt like the safest place in the world. The outside world was moving on around me, but I felt frozen in time. The life I thought I had just evaporated in an instant, and I didn't know how to rebuild. I didn't know where to begin. I didn't text Leah. I didn't call her back. For the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't owe her an explanation. Not anymore. What we had was over, and I needed to face it. I needed time to process everything. Time to grieve. To let go of the person I thought I knew. I wasn't ready to talk to her, wasn't ready to hear anything she had to say. Maybe I would never be ready. I spent the next few days in a haze. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every moment was a struggle to keep moving forward. The emptiness was suffocating, and I found myself replaying our last conversation over and over, as if hearing it again would somehow make sense of the mess she had left behind. But it never did. Eventually, after days of feeling numb and disconnected, I reached out to her sister, Kate. We hadn't spoken much since the separation, but I needed answers. I needed to know what had really been going on. Kate had always been honest with me even when Leah wasn't, and I hoped that she would be this time. When I spoke to Kate, her voice was quiet, hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should be saying what she was about to say. But there was no hesitation in her words when she confirmed what I had already suspected. Leah had been emotionally attached to someone else for years. That someone was Derek, the guy she couldn't let go of. The same Derek who had come back into her life when her company merged with his. It was all falling into place. The late nights, the distance. The way Leah had acted like she was somewhere else, like she was emotionally checked out of our relationship. I could see it now clearly, like a puzzle I had been too blind to put together before. She had never really been mine. She had always been waiting for Derek, hoping he would come back. And when he did, it was like everything we had just didn't matter anymore. I asked Kate more questions, but the more she told me, the more my heart broke. Leah had never been fully present with me. She had always been holding onto the past, holding onto a memory of someone she couldn't forget. I was just the safe choice, the one who fit into her life when things were falling apart, but not the one she had ever really wanted. Once I had all the information, I did what I had to do. I hired a lawyer. I filed for divorce. I couldn't keep living a lie, couldn't stay in a marriage that was built on someone else's shadow. It wasn't easy, nothing about this was easy, but I wasn't going to stay in a marriage where I was always second place. The legal process dragged on for months, each day feeling longer than the last. But with every step, I felt myself getting stronger. I started to rebuild my life one small piece at a time. It wasn't a smooth process. There were days when I felt like giving up, like maybe it would be easier to just go back to Leah to pretend that everything was okay. But I knew deep down that I couldn't. I deserved better than that. I deserved someone who would choose me, not someone who would settle for me. And then, months later, something unexpected happened. I met someone new. Her name is Megan, and she's different from Leah in every way. Megan is everything Leah wasn't. She's honest, straightforward, and most importantly, she actually chooses me. She doesn't make me feel like I'm a second option. She doesn't make me feel like I'm just the one who happens to be around when the other guy isn't there. She sees me, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm enough. I'm not living in anyone's shadow anymore. I'm not competing with a memory. Life's too short to be someone's second choice. For the first time in a long time, I'm excited about what the future holds. I'm starting fresh, and it feels like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. It's my turn to live a life that's truly mine. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure, I'm ready for it. I'm ready to embrace everything life has to offer without the baggage of the past weighing me down. Now that we've come to the end of today's story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the character's journey? How did you feel about the decisions they made? Drop your comments, share your reflections, or leave a rating if you can. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay tuned for the next exciting story coming your way. Thank you so much for sticking with me until the end. I truly appreciate you taking the time to listen.